At the very end of the 16th century, East Asia was thrown into one of the biggest, most brutal wars it had ever seen. And this wasn't just some squabble over borders. No, this was a war sparked by the absolutely unbelievable continent-sized dream of a single man.
So how on earth does that happen? How does one person's ambition lead to a conflict that would nearly destroy a kingdom, cripple a massive empire, and completely change the future for 3 different nations?
Well, that's what we're here to unpack. All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to start with that warlord's incredible dream. Then we'll follow the shocking samurai blitzkrieg into Korea and see how that nation fought back. After that, the Chinese dragon wakes up. Things take a very dark turn. And finally, we'll look at the deep scars this war left behind.
Okay, so it all starts with this one guy, Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Now, he was a brilliant general who had just done the impossible. He ended a century of non-stop civil war and united all of Japan under his rule. But here's the thing. Peace at home? That wasn't enough. He saw unifying Japan as just a warm-up act for something way, way bigger. To really get this, you have to understand that 2 totally different worldviews were about to collide. For centuries, the region ran on what's called the Chinese tribute system. You know, China was the big brother, the center of the universe, and its neighbors, like Korea, were the loyal little brothers who paid respect or tribute, and in return got trade and protection. Hideyoshi's plan? To smash that system to pieces, conquer China, and flip the script entirely, making China a vassal of Japan.
And he wasn't subtle about it. For Hideyoshi, this was just the next logical thing to do. He had this massive, battle-hardened army that had never lost. Why stop now? He told Korea he needed safe passage for his troops to go and invade China. When Korea, being a loyal ally to China, said no way, well, war was the only outcome.
So with diplomacy off the table, Hideyoshi unleashed his war machine. And that first invasion? Wow. It was a terrifying, lightning-fast attack that just stunned everybody and made the Japanese army look completely unstoppable.
Just look at that number. Over 158,000 troops. This wasn't some small raiding party. This was a massive professional army. These guys had spent their entire lives fighting in Japan's civil wars, and they were armed with thousands of firearms, early muskets, that had already proven decisive back home. Now they were about to be turned loose on a Korean army that just wasn't ready for this level of modern warfare.
The speed of the invasion was just insane. The main port city of Busan, it fell on day 1. Within only 2 weeks, they had stormed all the way to the capital, Seoul. The Korean king had to flee for his life, and the entire government basically collapsed. By July, the Japanese were in Pyongyang, almost at the Chinese border. For a minute there, it really looked like Hideyoshi's wild dream was actually coming true.
But what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object? Or, in this case, a couple of them. Just as Japan's army seemed to be swallowing the whole country, 2 very different, very powerful forms of Korean resistance started to push back. One at sea and one on land.
First up, this incredible piece of military hardware, the Jiobuksen, or turtle ship. Commanded by the absolute legend Admiral Yi Sun-sin, this thing was a complete game changer. It was basically a floating tank. It had an iron-plated, spiked roof so enemies couldn't board it, and it could just plow right into enemy fleets, firing cannons from all sides.
And while the Navy was dominating the seas, a second, fiercer resistance was popping up on land. With the regular army in tatters, everyday people, farmers, scholars, you name it, formed their own militias. They called themselves the Righteous Armies. And they, along with bands of warrior monks, started a brutal guerrilla war, hitting supply lines, ambushing patrols, and making life a living hell for the Japanese occupiers.
And these 2 forces, sea and land, completely changed the war. The biggest moment came at the Battle of Hansando. Admiral Yi cleverly lured the Japanese fleet into a trap. He used a tactic called the crane's wing, basically surrounding the Japanese ships and just hammering them from all sides. The result? Total annihilation. Japan lost control of the seas, and with it, their ability to easily resupply their massive army.
So with the Japanese advance completely stalled out, thanks to the Korean Navy and the guerrillas,
The third major power in the region finally decided to get off the bench. Ming China, honoring its duty as Korea's elder brother, sent a huge army to help its ally and kick the invaders out.
The real turning point on land happened at the siege of Pyongyang. The Chinese army showed up with a veteran commander and a ton of heavy cannons. They surrounded the city, and after a ferocious battle, with Korean monks fighting right alongside the Chinese soldiers, they smashed through the walls. The Japanese were completely routed and had to make a desperate escape across a frozen river in the middle of the night. Japan's grand advance was officially over.
Now you'd think that would be the end of it, right? Nope. Hideyoshi, back in Japan, was absolutely furious about these setbacks. He ordered a second invasion in 1597. But this time, it was different. This wasn't a war of conquest anymore. This was a war of pure, brutal revenge, and it got incredibly ugly.
The Japanese strategy became all about punishment. They went back to places where they'd been defeated before, like the fortress at Chenju. And this time, they left no one alive. An estimated 60,000 people were massacred. And it gets worse. Hideyoshi demanded proof of his army's kills, but shipping heads all the way back to Japan was too difficult. So his commanders started taking noses instead, from soldiers and civilians, it didn't matter, pickling them in salt and shipping them home in barrels as trophies.
The war finally ended when Hideyoshi himself died in 1598. As the Japanese army began to pull out of Korea for good, Admiral Yi launched one last massive attack to make sure they couldn't escape. But right at the peak of the battle, he was hit by a stray bullet. And his final order? He told his officers to cover his body with a shield, to keep beating the war drums, and to pretend he was still alive so the men wouldn't lose heart. And they did. They fought on and won the final victory.
So the fighting was over, but the consequences of this 6-year-long nightmare were just staggering. It left deep, permanent scars on Japan, on China, and most of all, on Korea.
It's almost impossible to really picture the human cost. But we have some idea, because the Japanese themselves kept meticulous records of their trophies. This is the official count of noses taken from Korean and Chinese victims and sent back to Japan. More than 200,000. Each one of those was a person.
And the most haunting reminder of this brutality still exists today. If you go to Kyoto in Japan, you can visit a place called the Mimizuka, which means mound of ears. It's actually a burial mound that contains the noses of tens of thousands of victims. It's just this grim, silent monument to how savage the war became.
The political fallout completely changed the balance of power. For Japan, the invasion was a disaster that destroyed Hideyoshi's family. It paved the way for a rival, Tokugawa Ieyasu, who cleverly stayed out of the war, to take over and start a dynasty that would rule for 250 years. For China, the incredible cost of the war drained its treasury, leaving the Ming dynasty weak and vulnerable to the invaders who would eventually conquer them. And for Korea, the battlefield for the whole thing, it was so utterly devastated that it just shut itself off from the world, becoming known as the Hermit Kingdom.
In the end, you look at all this death and destruction, and you have to ask, who really won? And the answer is nobody. There were no victors. Just 3 nations, scarred forever by a war that started with the unchecked ambition of just one man. It's a sobering reminder of the true cost of that kind of dream.